Last week, we delved into the Colorado Swarm Lights episode. If you recall, it was back in 2019 when what is said to be something like a group of drones, or really floating, hovering lights, east of the Denver metro area and prominently over a small rural county called Washington County. We got into the facts last week, into the when and where of it all. But this week, I'd like to share my own thoughts, my impressions, and a little bit about who I am and why I'm interested in these subjects and starting this podcast and sharing it with you. My name is Robert Cavalier, and for almost a decade, maybe more, I've been at first casually looking into different esoteric subjects. I'm a writer, so many of these things interest me in a research kind of way, in a detached kind of way. But as I got into it a bit more, as I got into the weeds, as they say, I discovered there was just much more beyond what meets the eye, beyond just storytelling, beyond just stories of interest. And as I really got more involved and more into, the nexus of it all, it became one of those situations where you're not expecting to discover more and more. And the more you think you find out, the more there is beyond. That's an indelible element about all of this. If you're interested in these kinds of subjects, you'll understand and recognize what I'm talking about. So, as I said, last week I got into a bit of the details of it all, and it's a small subject really in the spectrum of all the weird things that happen in this state and all over the country, really. But it's important because it mirrors so much of the pattern of the way that things go with these kinds of things. And all the way in 2019 and now really 2020s, it's a bit strange that after all the available information that we have over the internet, over social media, over many different ways of assessing new data, that we're still baffled by simple things that just come out of the woodworks, really, and in this case, actually, maybe literally out of the woodworks. So, if you didn't listen to last week's episode, the Colorado Swarm Lights were just about 16 to some say even 30 group of mysterious lights that hovered over rural Colorado and just east some maybe 20-30 miles of where I live, I think. I at that time was deep into a lot of work of my own, and very inspiring year, actually. And I was kind of alerted to it by what the neighbors were talking about. Just out walking with my dog, really, and people talking. This is a very grassroots kind of experience where you're not finding out through the news, through an app, through some kind of alert, and there really wasn't any alert. So that's also strange, We are living in an era of major hacks and disturbing sabotage from outside of our borders here, and yet we can be caught unawares. What if these things had been malicious spycraft? What if these things had been launched by a hostile nation? What if these things weren't even from our local neighborhood and really from really out there beyond, some kind of UAP, as they call them nowadays? I prefer the old term UFOs, unidentified flying objects, which at the time, that really was the most apt way to describe them. Well, you'd think that with our alert systems, with our radar capabilities, and where this all happened, because it's an interesting corner where this all happened. Right around, I wouldn't say it's a triangle, but you could almost say it's a triangle, because the Cheyenne Air Force area is just maybe 20, 40 miles north, so really nothing if you fly over at a high speed. Driving maybe take you an hour or less, depending on how fast you drive. And south of that, you've got DIA in one corner, you've got this Space Force spaceport that is a bit of a strange thing to have here. It's considered a kind of a business, yet somehow maybe even military involved project. And you've got this metro area with towers and all kinds of things detecting activity in the air. This is not a place that's sparsely populated, at least east of where these things happened. So getting back to the nature of it all and really how it reflects on where I'm going with this, it was not what I would consider eye-opening, but in a lot of ways it reminded me of things that I'd missed just walking about. I heard so much later about huge events like the Phoenix Lights over Arizona. These are major things, and I'll get into these things later on in the show in more exclusive and in-depth treatment of it all. Where I come from, where I hail from and came into Colorado from, was the Lubbock area, and there you go. You had the famous Lubbock Lights. I think they were a little bit before my time, just a bit. But still, I kind of thought, and this was even back in 2014, when I've explained that this is where I started to sort of, I would say, shed a bit of that skepticism, even though I still do have a healthy skepticism, and I'll define this a little bit later, and started to think, well, it's amazing that all these things happened back in the 90s and early 2000s, and you could sort of compartmentalize these things as isolated events, and yet there's a pattern emerging here. And even with all the time that's passed, 30 or something years, maybe 40 or 50 if you're counting from the Lubbock Lights, and still our response is kind of the same. It's actually almost exactly the same, and I'll get into that in a bit. So what we're talking about here is, how are we, the people that live in the cities or in the country, affected by it all? Why are we not told about these things? And maybe, why are we not pointing the fingers somewhere? Why are we not knocking on doors? And when we do try to knock on doors, who's answering? Welcome to part 2 of the part of Swarm Lights. And tonight we're discussing in a bit more of an intimate way, in a more conversational way. Last week we covered the facts, we covered what was available about this phenomenon, this case file, and yet it just kind of still leaves a bit of an aftertaste. And I want to deal with that tonight with y'all. I want to talk a little bit more about what's available out there, why this could be significant. And as I said, this week's episode really has more to do with my impressions, and I'd love to hear what anybody out there is also thinking about this. And if you were out there or out here in Colorado during that time, what this might have meant to you. This was right on the eve of the great epic pandemic, whatever you want to call it. So it was just kind of a weird time, a lot of weird things happening just on the cusp of this, what seems to me a new era. And I just don't know how else to define it, but it just, things feel different. It's like a demarcation point in some kind of way. So what I'd like to do tonight is get a little bit into where this show is going. And part one was a little bit more about how a half of an episode will really go like, where we're going into the details of things, the available literature, and when I can find them, and interviews, things like that, different perspectives. This time around, there's really not that much to go around. I'll try to reach out to the filmmaker of the documentary Lights in the Sky, and we'll see what I hear back, and we'll do kind of a wraparound with this. But as far as the show goes, the pattern of it you can expect, it will be something of a getting right into the facts of what the story is, and then this part, this movement of what does it leave us with, just at the experiential level. And that's just where I am. Even if we're just left scratching our heads, we'll be doing it together. So the show is going to be available on Apple Podcasts first. So I'll release usually a few days later, sometimes a week later before, and then as part of the RSS feed that's coming soon everywhere else. And just expect to see anything about this on X, on SoundCloud. I'll make episodes available there as well. I'll stay away from YouTube for now because I just don't like the whole Google environment, the whole dominion. I'm staying away. I know it's impossible to stay completely away, but for now I just would like to be a little bit on this side of the fence of things. If later we fan out there, we'll just fan out there. So one of the things that impacted me about this little story is that it's kind of like a dot in a big line of many dots, and it seems really rather random. It kind of almost seems like a big prank if you want to look at it that way. A bunch of swarming lights hovering over the horizon just after sundown, and people just experiencing these things and wondering, where is this coming from? They're not consistent with flights. They're not an area where you probably would see a lot of flights. They're in an area where you wouldn't expect to see very much except the stars, I think. So they're very noticeable. Somebody would have had to set this up. And that's my biggest impression. Not that it would be a classic UFO, even though we so use this term kind of incorrectly, because, by definition, a UFO is an unidentified flying object, and these were unidentified flying objects and are still such. The conclusions that we'll reach later are really not even conclusions, but the surmising of it all by the authorities is that they were, who knows what they were. That's what they're saying. Man-made things that were flying illegally. You need a permit to fly these things even nowadays. So these things are getting more and more regulated. They're expensive if they were drones, and I do think that that's what they were. I'm just going to come out and say, why am I holding back? That's my impression. They were a group of drones controlled by some actor, unknown actor for an unknown reason. It could be military, and if it was military, it seems rather strange that they would do it over this flyover area when they have a lot of areas that are no-fly zones that they can easily test things out, and nobody will bother them, and nobody will, they might observe them from a long distance, but they can do as they please, and that's why they have them. So it's really bizarre that nobody's coming forward and saying who really owns this, and it's a sophisticated thing to do, to coordinate so many of these flying objects at one place and at one time, You have to ponder about computing power, about coordination, about maybe more than one person acting on this. Some might think maybe it was something like a UFO or something like that, but it's just not consistent based on the observations that we have on the ground on that day. They are not consistent with prior, not only trained observations of major, I would say, alien source UFOs and UFOs that we cannot attribute to our own technological capability, whatever time now or 40, 50, 70 years ago. But these are not like that. They do seem accessible. They're hard to, they were filmed, but they're hard to kind of get a hold of and pin. Unfortunately, the optics were not such that they could get a very high grade, high definition of what they really consisted of, what's running them, the engines, the flying compartments, the mechanisms, any of these things. And of course it was night, so all the more difficult. The night factor is important. It's not to be dismissed. Somebody or something or whoever this thing was spawned over by decided to do it at this time of the night. Why? Well, maybe to have a light show. And yet we didn't hear anything, but nothing was promoted. You leave a lot of people a little bit in confusion. It could cause distractions on the road, even on rural roads. People drive over there. They could get into an accident. So if anybody was doing this, they might not even want to give a heads up to the state patrol or local sheriffs. That would have been nice. So when you do have something like this that seems a random, out of the nowhere kind of action, you kind of have the reflex to compartmentalize it. And that's what we do with our experiences. I'm just like you, and I do that. If I see something weird, hear something weird, you might react to it. You might have a knee-jerk reaction, and if it's disturbing or long enough, the duration is important. The significance of it is gauged by how much of whatever it is we experience and for how long, the nature of it all, really. But otherwise, we kind of just, go our way. And how many times have you seen the scene in a movie where someone is sort of maybe sleeping or just at rest, and they hear something breaking, maybe a branch or a rock, being kicked over, and they sort of are already maybe an alert in this scene in the movie, and they get in their high gear and they put their searchlights, and then they, or you turn the porch lights on, and then you wait a few moments, and then that's it. You run out of patience, and then you turn everything off, and you go back to bed. You withdraw. You set it aside. It's almost something that's very characteristic of our nature of almost any animal. You don't keep listening, and you should really, if you think about it. If it's something that's out there lurking, it's going to be possibly cognizant enough to hide its movements, and if it sort of screwed up, it might just stop, wait patiently, and then move slowly again. But we don't do that. We don't have the bandwidth for that. We just react to present danger, and then we move on. When there's enough of these random things, though, then they're not so random, is what I think. Then they begin to become part of what I would think is a pattern. A pattern starts to emerge. And boy, do we have so many random or so-called random dots, events. If you could picture in your mind some kind of canvas with a timeline and a bunch of little dots, you would see this region, not just Colorado, but it happens to be where I'm hailing from and where I'm speaking to you from. But all over this southwest and mountain west region, Of course, Midwest, East, all over the place. But really, this isn't a remote area still, and there are so many things that have happened since, let's just put a date to it, since the 30s to the present. I'm not saying that's when it is. It actually probably goes way back, and again, we're gonna get into this in some of the future episodes. How far back do some of these things go? Could it be that the Native Americans that roamed this land for 30,000 years or more witnessed aerial phenomena that just could not be explained today either? Could it have influenced them? It's those are big questions, and we'll get into those later. It's not for this show. But if you could see a timeline in, let's say, the 30s, or even the 1800s, but let's just say the 30s. Let's say around the time when we're really recording, we have, I don't think we even have the radar then, because the radar came later as an invention from the British during World War II. But, we're still watching. We have trained observers. We have flight. We have balloons. We have all kinds of things flying out there. And yet we're starting to record meteorological readings. We're starting to really pay attention to the atmosphere in a different way than we had perhaps before. Just a different style of measuring, because we've always watched the sky. Humanity has. It's not an uncommon thing to not just look it over, but really, really look it over, really be in its presence, really be wrapped in it. And that's a different experience too. So many people don't get to experience a lightless sky. In other words, a sky that's not disturbed by the noise of street lights and building lights and traffic lights and so on, but really just moonlight, if there's moonlight, or if it's a moonless night, just the stars and nothing else. And if you get to see that, and there are still quite a few places, and you can find them. There's probably websites dedicated to this thing. You can find some places here in Colorado. There's a few sections. I know that by Wycliffe, and there's some small towns that Crestone and other areas, other little tucked away areas, of course, very rural areas. They get to have this really velvet black sky. And if you drive in the desert, I still remember, and one of the nicest memories of driving through the country, driving with my close friends from Vegas to I think to the Grand Canyon, and through Arizona, around Kingman area, another interesting area, by the way, for many reasons. We'll get to that one later. But the desert sky, oh my goodness, the star-filled, quiet, black. It's you and it and nothing else. So we have been watching for a long time. And now, in modern times, we watch in different ways. We don't watch with our eyes as much because we have different ways of measuring things, and because we live inside. We're watching screens all the time, and we've got lights on. We've got noise that's distracting us from what's out there. And that's a pivotal point. There is a reality that's out there, right outside your doorstep, maybe, even just a few steps from wherever you're living. If you live in a suburb and maybe there's a trail nearby and lights, there aren't any, there are just no street lights, and there might be some coyote tracks there. There might be some little strange things that you might not see or might not think exist, but they pass through. A lot of things happen in that liminal stage, in that liminal space and time. And we, again, are just trained by our habits to go inside about 5, 6 p.m. and stay inside and go to bed at 9, turn the lights out, and there we go. And yet we have the notion that we get to experience what it is that is out there. We don't know unless we get out there, and I encourage you to do this. Get out there, go camping, go for long walks, go in the park. Don't stay inside. Life is too short. Experience, just breathe. See the moon. We're here a few days on the eve of a major eclipse that unfortunately is a bit of a distance from where I am and where that's main path is going to be, which is going to be down in Texas. Not too far away. It'd be maybe what? Oh, well, it is kind of far away. It'd be about maybe 16 hours, 13 hours drive, somewhere around there. East of Abilene, north of Austin, somewhere in that big swath of land. But we'll get to see a partial part of it, and that's an experience to have. It's not just about the lore and the legend, but actually just nature itself is mysterious enough and produces enough to inspire us, to baffle us. So let me pivot back to what we're talking about here, which is the swarm lights. The vantage point is important. So it's just that depending on your vantage point, it is sometimes too difficult to ascertain that pattern. The pattern that I was talking about that seems to be emerging in this high strangeness factor, when random is not so random, when something is just not a weird data point where it's actually something pointing to something completely different, something peeking out and coming into contact with us in an unexpected way, whatever that is. So this is how, in our search for answers, confabulation, conspiracy making, conflation, speculation, conjecture, and storytelling get woven into a reported phenomenon, because we're looking for answers. Our brains are geared to come up with something about what this could possibly be. It's just we either put it away or we come up with something. And we want to be self-aware enough about our own limitations, about what it is to be human, to experience the world, because we're not the end-all be-all. Don't subscribe to that notion. We're just another animal on this big earth, and we share it with everything else. And our way of looking at things is just one way of looking at things, but there are many ways of looking at things. And that leads us to go back into the fundamentals, to go back to basics, to go back to asking the essential questions based on considered, trained observation. What is actually out there? What appeared to have been seen, detected? What is its nature? What is it made of? And we stick to the simplest perceptions, the observation itself, and fan out from there. So if we see something that's consistent with the flight of birds, well, maybe they're birds. If we see something that's consistent with the hovering movement of these drone machines, with just a few years ago, they were still quite a bit novel. Now they're more out there. Then maybe that's what they are. And that's what we have in this situation. An observation followed by a conclusion is a conjecture. So you have an observation and you make a conclusion. Well, congratulations. You've just conjectured something. Something of an example of this is when we first started observing Mars. And you'll recall a little bit of the lore of Mars. Astronomers looking at patterns on the surface that we could, for the first time, begin to discern. And they were consistent with what we could think of as canals or riverbeds or something man-made, something like dams, and something that looked like it was worked on by somebody. And from that was born the whole bunch of stories about Martians there. That's a conjecture. Observation of things that look like little lines on the surface of Mars, and then you go to the other end and there's Martians. That's a classic conjecture. Is it fun? Of course it's fun. It's fun to speculate. It's fun, and it's part of how we should be thinking about things. We shouldn't shy away from speculation. It is not an inferior way of thinking. It's just one way of thinking. But we have to be aware that we're doing that. We have to be aware that we're playing with ideas, with information in a very specific sort of way. We've got still the benefit of empirical thinking. I still ascribe to it, even though I think that subjective experience is very important. I do value it. And as I said in the first part of this Colorado Swarm Lights episodes, that subjectivity is more in the foreground now versus objectivity in terms of its value. Not that one is more than the other, but when it comes to philosophers, when it comes to people who think very carefully about these things, they're thinking more about how subjective experience really does matter. It matters because it exists, because it's part of us, right? It's how we see things. So that doesn't mean we just throw away everything and abandon empirical process and that way of thinking. If it's missing, then we're missing something fundamental too. We're missing something that we've gained through the Enlightenment period, and now I'll get into that, and I keep saying I'll get into that, but it's just we're at the outset of this new venture, and yes, it's going to lead into so many things. But one of the things that we have to think about is the way that not just our technology has changed, our environment has changed, our spirituality has changed, but our philosophy, in our ideas, in the history of our ideas, and how they change, and how it's important to look at them, because they run not parallel, but right with how we perceive the world. And most people are dismissive of that, and we're not going to be dismissive about that in this show. We're going to include it, because metaphysics is part of how things are run. It's part of how we figure things out, and it's an important tool. But if we go back to the basics, we go back to Science 101, not sci-fi, but Science 101, it's observation, hypothesis creation, testing, analysis, and potential conclusions. So deriving potential conclusions from this process. And this is what we call inductive reasoning. Not coming up with a binary way of thinking, well, it's got to be this or this. That may work in some contexts. I'm not saying no. But the more complex and the more samples you have, and the more difficult the testing is and the idea is, then the higher the possibility that you are not going to get into one conclusion, but you're going to find very likely candidates. That's inductive reasoning, and it's a very good way of thinking, and it really leads to a whole revolution of the mind, which is why we have what we have these days. We have, flying cars and such. Oh, well, not yet, but it's coming soon. So normally, I'd like to point out that I'll be diving into research, selecting outstanding esoteric books and articles, and sharing these with you. But in this case, there's not much out there. So let's see what the literature is that is out there with regards to the swarm lights. Mostly, it kind of spawns from local news, really. Those are I'll read a little bit of the something from NBC News affiliate. Here it's Channel 9 News, and what they are reporting is not much more than what I shared with you on the first episode. So 9 News contacted a list of agencies including Google, Amazon, Uber, NORAD, and NOAA, who have claimed the drones don't belong to them. They're not that great writers, these 9 News guys, but I do like them. Pretty cute reporters too. Anyway, the confirmed sightings began with a Facebook post from the Phillips County Sheriff's Office. That's an important thing. So we got this major news beginning with on-the-ground observers, people driving, people spotting these things, and then the sheriff's office, very responsibly there, sharing through social media what they thought about it. And all they could do was shrug and say that they probably weren't malicious. Again, this is from an article from 9 News. It was also aired. Deputies, go on, didn't say why they believe the drones aren't malicious. And a quote, they were kind of flying in a grid out in the towns, out in the county. You'd see 3 or 4 flying in a line out in the east in the county, Washington County Sheriff John Stivers said last week. Nevertheless, Stivers said the drones haven't invaded anybody's space as far as housing that I'm aware of. And ends by saying, it is concerning because, one of the reports I had last night, this is the sheriff still speaking, was that the drone is way bigger than 6 feet. It sounds like a small jet engine when it's flying, Stivers said. These are not drones that people in our county can just buy. I love the way it ends because it's so on the ground, such an honest rendering of what was there. It's a conclusion, right? But it's a scratching of the head happening right there in this quote. It's like, these are not things that are consistent with what people around here might just have access to. And then it goes on with other articles like Inside Edition did a bit of a rendition, but it's going to be mirroring what the Denver Post and so on, other local newspapers and news media are going to be reporting pretty much the same thing. A quote from that. Here's from Inside Edition, I believe, quoting the Denver Post, which said, they've been doing a grid search, a grid pattern, Phillips County Sheriff Thomas Elliott said. They fly one square, and then they fly another square. Interesting, right? So now we have a little bit more commentary about what kind of behavior we're seeing from these swarm lights, from these possible drones. And it seems like they have a pattern of movement. So right here it's identified as such. He's passing on information. We don't know. We haven't tested it, but it's a great lead. And one of my goals this coming weeks, I've got to do some traveling, actually international, bringing some stories from there too. I'm going to Denmark, and I'm going to bring you some stories from there as well. But I'll head into Washington County, and I'll speak to whoever will speak to me, either the sheriff or whoever, and I'll go out there and I'll see, and I'll bring you the stories. Why aren't you bringing us the stories right now? Well, that's how the show is going to be. But for now, I'm leading you on. I'm leading you on, and then I'm going to deliver, because I do deliver. The little excerpt here goes a little bit more into officials from the FAA also informed police that they have no idea who is flying the drones because drone pilots aren't obligated to submit flight plans unless they are in a controlled space. The Air Force and Army forces also confirmed they are not responsible for the drones. So we've got denials from major agencies. In fact, one of the headlines says that 15 or 19 agencies deny any part of this. There's just a lot of unanswered questions, and the people that are asking aren't just regular folks. There are these sheriffs and these state patrol and local officials and all kinds of people and reporters and wanting just an answer because it's concerning. Again, I said in the beginning, what if these things had been malicious? There have been reported, well, they don't seem malicious. And they don't seem malicious because they don't seem threatening. They're just sort of a hovering thing. But what if they had been? What if, God forbid, this had been carrying some kind of explosive devices, or they'd been a test run for a kind of a terrorist attack? Horrible, horrible prospects. And I'd hate to even mention it and give anybody an idea out there. And if you are having those ideas, well, look into yourself and really think, why are you hurting humanity? No, go the other way. Go the other way. But a few articles about it. They all, like I said, they all kind of mirror a little bit of bouncing back and forth about what they're saying. What's noteworthy about that is that it became from a local news something that's becoming really a national level news. Even the New York Times, the revered New York Times, picked it up, and I think it's kind of amazing because what is that? A market or a readership of, it's got to be easily 8 to 10 million people right there in that area of the country. So spreading easily to other markets, you've got the whole country wrapped around this for a few days or a day or whatever our attention span can carry. Noteworthy too that we haven't heard anything about this. I mean, it's just the last conclusions were having to do more with, and I guess it's noteworthy. I believe in local government, to be straightforward with you. I think a lot of folks out there are perhaps rightly suspicious of major and complicated and ununderstandable agendas that the bigger agencies might have, and they might be inadvertently doing a lot of good things and bad things and in between things, but their transparency is very lacking, and that a lot of us agree on. Local government functions differently. Local government, people like the sheriffs, they've got to answer to their people. They've got to be elected, and they themselves care for the people that they serve. Local county government is the same. I happen to be involved in a bit of that, and I know, and I've seen it in action. I can tell you that if you want to make a difference, or if you want to be part of a conversation that results in change, get involved. Get in the discussion. Go for things. Run for things. Do these things. You can make an impact in the local level. At the bigger level, that's a whole different ballgame, and I don't claim to know. I do respect our major agencies and what they're trying to do, but I do criticize the fact that they're just not coming off to us, the regular folks, as being transparent enough and being on the level. The biggest thing that I found out there that got more in depth was by a local film producer. I was really impressed by this. 2020 documentary Lights in the Sky by Krista Alexander. And this is about the most comprehensive dive into the subject that you'll find out there. I watched it myself even then, or just around when it came out. It must have been available on Amazon, which at the time Amazon was quite different. It was just, there were a lot more videos that were available about different kinds of little documentaries and independent makers, and now it all went to freebie and ads, and it's not good. I think there are better venues. I'll share with those what those are. They don't pay me for this, okay? Just started out, so and if they did, I'd tell you. But I'll share with you what I think, I think you could find more interesting subjects. They're maybe you can stream for free on Tubi. You can stream for free on I believe, Freevee, I guess. It's where a lot of things have sent, but there's a lot of ads. And I think there's UFO TV produces great documentaries on not just UFOs, but on all kinds of phenomena. And great if it just is for you at the entertainment level, perfect for a little 1 hour easy watch, 45-minute documentary. They abound in these streaming services. So I'll share down the road a little bit more about my impressions on those. And I want to myself be transparent with where I find the information, so that you're not at a loss of where I'm coming up with these things. And of course, also to credit the sources and the people that work hard on these things. I was kind of surprised. I looked at the reviews for Krista Alexander's documentary on IMDb, and it was pretty divided. It was people that really appreciated it, and others that kind of nitpicked, as they do. Some of the resolution on the images that she shows about the swarm lights is not great. And I think she zooms in. There's a little bit of criticism about that, because well, you really can't make out much. It's just pixelated and not great definition. In fact, it's almost worse to zoom in on them. But that's what she had available to share, and she chose to share it that way, and I commend her for it. And I think the criticisms are a little bit heavy-handed, and maybe that's not the whole voice out there, but the reviews were a little bit bad. And come on, guys, I mean, we're talking about we're in the 2020s and encouraging women producers, filmmakers, actresses, all these fine folks to come to the foreground where they haven't been before, and then when they do, we give them bad ratings. So, I'm not saying give them a good rating just because they're a woman, but I think this, given what the material source is, I think she did pretty fine. It's paltry, the amount of information that's out there about the subject, and the quality of the videos that's out there. It's not going to be high because people are shooting with their phones. People are not having high resolution or thermal cameras, or if they did, that'd be one heck of a thing, and it would be something that we would want to explain. Why would you have that out there? Why would you have a $3,000 camera out there? But no, we don't have much information. I couldn't find anything about any radar readings from that time, if they were detectable or if they were followed or anything. Or another thing that I thought was a little bit strange is that nobody seemed to be alerted. There was no alert system that was generated with regards, or in response rather, to a mass of flying objects or nearing a major metropolitan area, which is the Denver metro area. And we're talking about they could have been here in 15, 20 minutes and caused all kinds of havoc. We don't know. So could that have been Amazon? Amazon is just about a few miles north of where I live. Major, I wouldn't know if it's major, but it's a big hub of warehouse and all kinds of things, and a great employer. But they are said to have delved into deliveries with drones. Do I really think they had anything to do with it? I'll tell you right off the bat, I don't think so. I don't think a company wants to be known for scaring people when they're trying to make money. So I will just share with you that I don't think that has anything to do with it. Krista Alexander's movie or documentary, Lights in the Sky, available somewhere where you can stream things. Look it up. Should shed quite a bit more light into puns almost unintended, into the subject, because it's about the most comprehensive, and unless you want to go ahead and reconcile, as I did, a lot of the different sources. Remember too that it's not just important to see what's there and what's being described and the opinions that are coming forth, such as from the people that experience these things. One of the ones that happened to be driving by were really disturbed by it, and they thought these things. One of the guys said, I was following this thing in my vehicle for a while, going at 50, 70 miles an hour, and I could not keep up. So it disturbed him that these things were fast enough and seemed to have a concerted way of evading him or going into a certain direction with kind of an intelligence, or someone with some intelligence behind all of it, and an unknown agenda. The unknown agenda factor is a huge provocation. When you do whatever it is that you do, whoever it is that did it, you're provoking a lot of people. And in this case, this was a rogue act, no matter if it was done by a agency from our side or from China or somewhere. And that, by the way, I didn't go into that, and it's not completely, unfeasible or unthinkable, because what happened just recently in the last couple of years, these balloons, right? These low-level flying or high-level flying balloons, low-tech, to spy on us. And that was a big debacle. And so could this have been part of that? It's a question. And The fact that nobody's owning up to it, but we do have, pretty firm denials, is a bit telling. Can you trust the denial from an Air Force? Can you trust the denial from these other agencies? Well, no. I'll just say no, because my impression is that they haven't been forthright with us in the past about things that were covert operations due to national security claims, whether they were valid or not. I can't assess that, but we can't trust their no. We can't trust the information that's given to us by the major sources or the major agencies that could possibly carry out this kind of operation. That's a problem for the layman. It's a problem because we're sort of counted off as not needing an explanation, as being too dull to understand, or too scared, or too whatever it is, put an X on it, to be significant enough to deserve an answer. But this still is a democracy. This territory here is still run by, supposedly the democratic people, and we do deserve an answer. So if one is coming, we should have it. And if one is known and is hidden, then it should be cracked open, and we should have it, even if it is a small matter. Because I think it's a thread. I think it leads to many other things. I think it's a node. And again, I'll repeat myself. I feel like there's a pattern. There's a pattern, and we'll get to it. We'll get to DIA down the road. We'll get to parallel 37th, or 37th parallel, rather. I've been there. Salida, all these other places, Crestone, many other places, strange places, I'll tell you that. We'll get to New Mexico, and by get there, I don't mean just I'll cover them by the news or the research I've done, but I'll actually get there. Again, I've been there over all these years of travels. I love traveling the southern Colorado area, Four Corners area, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. I think they're magical. I really do. There are many mysteries there, and it's a beautiful land, rich with lore, and we're going to get into that. But until then, we're going to go ahead into this territory physically. I'm going to take some field trips out there. I outfitted a van over this last summer, to be able to take these trips and spend some time out there and connect with people. So you might see me in this big old blue van, and me wearing my wide brim hat, and my dog, little husky. I'll out her. Her name is Ruby, and she's wonderful. And we'll take these big trips, and we'll see what's out there, and we'll connect with other groups and other investigative groups. And I'll do that and start to get a grassroots thing going, so that we have information coming from somewhere. And I'll be one of the suppliers. I'll be one of the investigators. I've got some training behind me, and I'll get into that as well and share that with you. Again, I do want to be transparent about these things, because I wonder about these things. I spent so much of my life taking so many things for granted, watching things just pass me by, major things, I think, events, and only to realize later that, what was I doing then? How come I wasn't aware of that? And you might be listening to this and thinking the same thing. And so if you are, we're going to change that. And we're going to start to scratch a little bit at the surface, and little by little unearth something about the unfathomable, as much as we can. Until then, take good care of yourselves. Get out, investigate, ponder about things, breathe, be kind to one another, and look around. Look behind you. Look over your shoulder. You might just see something you've never seen before.